Today, I'm going to show you how I paint this scene from Sicily. We're going to talk through the color mixing, the values, and how to simplify a complicated scene. The first thing that I do after I do my drawing is I wet down the front and the back of the paper and I lay it flat on my surface. In the first wash of the scene, I'm thinking about the light, looking at the lightest values of every object. First thing I'm going to do is start with the sky. There's not a lot of clouds in the sky, but by painting around a few little areas like this, we can give the sky a nice wispy look to it. I lay in just a little bit of raw sienna and lavender for the color of the clouds. Then I negatively paint around those areas that I want to preserve to create this sky. Now you'll notice the sky is a richer, deeper blue at the top. It becomes more diffused as it nears the horizon. You want to keep that in mind when you're painting skies. This here is raw sienna with a little bit of lavender. And where I'm getting a little bit darker, I'm using some neutral tint to strengthen up that mixture. Now, even though I dampened the paper, I didn't get it sopping wet. I just got it a little damp. That allows me, when I come down to here, to paint around some of these areas that are brighter. So I'm always keeping the light in mind through each phase of the painting. The areas that seem a little warmer in color, I'm using more raw sienna within the mixture. And I lightly brought that wash down over some areas where these light colored umbrellas are. I don't want to just leave them as the white of the paper, and I don't want things to have a really cut out look. So I like to drag that wash down over the light areas. Now I am painting around these statues here because I want stronger light upon them, but I will even tone those down as we get further into the process. Now down here where there's a little more warmth, a little more saturation, I'm mixing in some richer raw sienna into that mixture. There are a few figures that I want to preserve the light on. I'm painting around those now. I will add some color for their skin tone and for their clothing. Now you'll notice I'm softening these areas and taking away some of the white on these statues, but leaving a light side. So see this little bit here, this little sliver of white paper, same thing here, a little sliver of white on the edge. Now I need to add the tone in for the ground. For that, I'm using some lavender into the mixture. A little bit of lavender, a little bit of raw sienna, and then as I get to the bottom of the painting, I'm increasing the strength of this mixture. It almost creates a vignette around your painting when you do that, where the lightest, most saturated, most interesting part of the painting is in the middle ground. That's a subtle way of pushing the viewer's eye into the scene. Now I have these figures. I don't want them to just be completely cut out from this first wash. I'm doing the same thing I did with the statues and taking away most of the white, but leaving just little bits of light on the side of them. And I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of color to some of these. There's a woman here that's wearing some yellow. I'm adding some yellow to her clothing and also some skin tone. For that, I'm using a raw sienna with a touch of rose madder permanent and dropping that in and kind of letting it fuzz. This area over here was a tricky part of the painting. There's so many people, so many umbrellas, so much detail. My approach to areas like that in paintings is to really squint at them, look at them, and try to see patterns of light and dark and paint those patterns. But I know I wanted some figures, and where those figures are, I'm adding in the skin tone right now. Also a little bit of red in the clothing and little bits of color. So you'll notice I'm covering most of the paper, but that doesn't mean I can't go back in and add some pigment after I've already painted over those areas. That way I don't have to paint around everything so carefully. I can paint right through it and then add some of that pigment after I've painted over it. But you'll notice I'm not getting too obsessed with what every little figure looks like in the reference photo. I'm trying to generally create an impression of the scene. And after the skin tone and clothing, I'm adding in little bits of value for the tables, the chairs, things like that. This is important because later on when I come in to paint around these, I'll have some colors and some lighter areas that I can paint around. And before I'm done with the first wash, I wanted to throw in a little bit of the green here. There were some palm trees here and they're catching the light. I want to lay that in now. That way, when I go back over it with darker pigment, if there's areas that I want to preserve, I can paint around them and I have a good feeling of light that way by layering these values on top of each other. That is a look at the first wash of the scene. Once the paper dries, I come back in and get into the middle values and the darks. I want to zip ahead and show you where we're going with this. This is a lot of the middle values and darks, and back it up, and I'm going to show you how we got to this. So we're right here. We have all the lights in place, and I'm going to start working from left to right. So I go ahead and add a little bit more detail onto that tree. I come down into the building over here on the left. This mixture is a lot of raw sienna, some raw umber, a little bit of neutral tint, and where I want some cooler areas, I'm using some cobalt blue. So it's a fairly simple mixture, and it's different ratios of that creates variation within this shape. So I'm working my way, knowing that I needed to paint around the tops of these umbrellas. In this phase, I'm painting the middle values in a large connected shape, working my way through, looking at my reference photo, changing colors as needed. Now I want you to look here at the statue. It's not done yet, but it's a good example of how layering values can add some complexity to your work. So far we have the light area that's catching the light. Then we have the little subtle bit of darker area that we painted in the first wash. Now when we paint the middle values around it, we really get it to stand out. That helps us create a compelling feeling of light. So by taking your time and layering, you can really create that feeling of complexity. So painting through the trees, painting around this second statue here, and continuing along with the building. Now, there's a really interesting rock formation behind the church here. So I'm painting that right into this shape. And so far, this doesn't look great right here, but I know that that part of the building is going to be darker in a little bit. So I can go ahead and paint this and let it merge where it can merge, knowing that I will get the right amount of detail and separation between the middle ground and background. So I'm using some cooler colors in the background, more cobalt blue for this, letting it rest in the background, painting around the building and a little bit of the tree here. And like I mentioned before, I'm really trying to abstract this area here and not make it too complicated. If there's too much detail and too much interest, the viewer's eye is going to get stuck right here on the edge of the painting. That's why we want to create an impression and paint it in a really simple way where it represents what it's supposed to represent, but it doesn't take over the painting. I'm adding a few little darks and tying the shadow shape into what I'm painting and doing the same thing over on the right. I'm halfway done with this painting, but I just realized that I needed something more in the middle ground, foreground area to make this painting feel more complete. I saw a figure that was further into the painting. I scooted him closer to us and made him bigger. I actually took my pencil, did a little bit of outline of where I wanted him to go, made sure that his head was on the level with the rest of the people that are standing in the scene, and worked him into the painting, bringing him forward, making him more prominent in this scene. Now, this is really the middle values here. I'm going to jump into the darks and the details and start to create the separation and add in important details to help this building separate from the background and organize the painting. So I'm painting the shadow on that side, the shadow on the left. And another thing that I wanted to do was have some softer shadows in the foreground. So I dampened the paper in the foreground and then added some of the shadow color, leading us into the scene and helping to give the foreground just a little bit more interest. Now I'm into the details. I'm going to get into the figures, and I like how the figures are looking too. We have a good feeling of light on them. So now adding a little bit of darks, just a few marks on them, we can complete them. And going back to my main figure here, adding the shadow side to him and adding the shadows underneath the figures. Shadows are a great way to ground the figure and also to create that feeling of light. We're starting to get the feeling of light in the scene, and that really becomes apparent when we get the darks and the details in place. I need some more detail. I need to help bring that building forward, and this color here is more of what I used in the middle values. It's more raw sienna, a little bit of neutral tint, mix in some raw umber as needed, and if there's a cooler area, I'm using some cobalt blue. But now I can start to create that separation between the background and this building and help that building feel closer, let the background rest into the distance. Getting in the details getting the shadow side of the building. That, again, helps with our feeling of light. The light's coming in this way. This area is lighter. This part of the building is darker. Adding in some detail on the buildings. The verticals of the trees, I think, are a great addition. This little mark here and these here. Continuing to add the little windows and little details on the building that will help add the character of this amazing building into place. And those windows really do make a lot of difference. It shows us where to look at on the building, and it doesn't just seem like one flat shape anymore. And adding a few little darks under there, I felt like I needed to take away some of the light under the umbrellas and add a little bit more value and contrast and show that some of that is in shade. This is a small thing, but I'm adding a little bit of tone to the statues with a touch of raw sienna just to add some warmth to it. And I needed some more shadows on the umbrellas and finishing up the figures. Now, this isn't bad where we are now. I do think that some directional lines to help lead us into the scene are a good idea. So I'm taking my rigger brush, making sure the lines are going the right direction, just sweeping in a few of those lines, and that'll imply some of the texture on the ground and provide good directional lines leading us into the scene. I'm using my X-Acto knife to get a few little highlights into the scene on the tops of the figures, any little areas that need a little bit of glimmer of light, and that's a good way to do it. A lot of times I'll use gouache. Sometimes if I want to be really precise, I'll use an X-Acto knife. Scratching in a few highlights there breaks this area up a little bit. And also I thought it'd be nice to put a bird over here, kind of break up this edge and give us something else to look at right there. And add a little touch with my rigger brush, add in another bird, a few little birds flying around, gives a more of a feeling of life. And finally I sign it, and here we are. When there's a lot of detail, try to squint at it and simplify it as much as you can, and look at the pattern of light and dark and try to create that. Let the values lead the way. I know we covered a lot of ground today, and this can be overwhelming for people. Fortunately, I've created a free resource, a guide for you. Take a look at this. Have you ever been really excited about a painting and you get all set up, you find that right reference that you're excited about, and then it's time to go and you feel lost? I have a free resource that I want to give to you today that can help with these problems. My 5 steps to plan a successful watercolor painting. I walk you through the crucial planning phase of your painting that will help you understand what you're going to paint first, second, and third. The planning is really so important, especially in watercolor. This medium is harder to correct. It's so immediate. So having that plan is very important. I send you a PDF that you can download. And the great thing about this is you can have it on your phone. You could print it out. You can download this right now before you start your next painting. All you have to do is follow this link here and download my 5-step guide to planning a successful watercolor painting.